Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. I am Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, December 5th, 2023, almost to the end of the year. So tonight's broadcast is one that obviously, even from the attendance, is something that so many people need. I'm going to be talking about boundaries, and more boundaries. I probably have more broadcasts on boundaries than anything else uh, in terms of their own individual topic. But aside from that, and you'll know this if you're a regular watcher or listener of these broadcasts, that ultimately it comes down to the similar principles every single broadcast, no matter what I'm talking about, and boundaries. And I'm gonna bridge that on over to self-care tonight. Boundaries and self-care are at the root of what I'm constantly discussing in this process. So I really look forward to this one tonight. Hope I put together a good one. Before I get into that, I want to announce our upcoming couples workshop. This is going to be held in February 7th through 11th. It's being hosted by me, Dr. Brad Reedy, and my wife, Michelle Reedy. More than just my wife, she's a therapist in her own right, licensed marriage and family therapy. So it's for couples that want to come and do their work together. If one of you has done some work in this area, it could be a way to bring that work together. It's not for a high conflict couple. That would be more for a private couples intensive, but it's for something I believe, and I came to this conclusion for myself many years ago, that part of being in a marriage is to learn to fall in love with my partner's dilemma. It's one of the phrases that my therapist has taught me, to fall in love with her dilemma over and over again, which means understand that the way she acts, the way she reacts, the things that might trigger me aren't about me, and vice versa, right? The way I react, the way I respond to her, and the things that I do that trigger her aren't about her. They come in large part from our back. So if you are an individual who's doing some of this work, who wants to do this work, maybe even for the first time, and you have a partner that you can do the work in front of, that's really important. Then I think this finding connection workshop, couples workshop, is a fantastic opportunity. It's kind of like our Finding You workshop, but we do it with couples. And so being able to understand what your partner brings to bear in the relationship, positive and negative, right? Their liabilities and their resources. This can do a great bit of work to help you understand that and to be understood by your partner. So I think it's fantastic. Having said that, let's get into tonight's topic about boundaries. I wanted to bring a few quotes to you to begin with, um, to set the stage for what I'm going to be talking about more systematically. These are three quotes that again, no matter what I talk about, in some ways, there's some reference or some drawback to the idea of boundaries. So I share these quotes. I brought up these three quotes for this evening to begin. The first one is from James Hollis, and the third one is from James Hollis. James Hollis said, "We are all raised to be nice, really nice. A reflexive niceness is pathogenic loss of connection to the soul and is not nice. The opposite of such a reflexive niceness is called authenticity or integrity." I don't think we think about boundaries in those terms. We all struggle with boundaries. We all are confused by boundaries. And I don't think we realize how conditioned we are to not hold our boundaries. The world that's trying to make us into something other than what we are, so that we'll take care of other people's needs, specifically starting off with what I call the big people that we grew up around, that we grew up under. That is programming that has become entrenched in our brains, in our psyche. And to come out of that is to become who you are, to become authentic, to become your horrible, rotten self, your authentic, genuine, or real self. I love this quote shared by an Instagram account, Perth Child Rensut. I don't know how to pronounce that, but or Children's SOT, Children OT. I don't know who it is. But the quote goes like this: "Children don't owe anyone a hug. Not a hello hug, not a goodbye hug, not a but we had a great time together hug. Not a I'll hug, but I'll be sad if you don't hug. Children are not responsible for pleasing adults." The reason I shared that quote, again, it wasn't directly tied to the instruction I'm going to give around boundaries, but we start to see, as we become clearer and more boundaried, we'll be able to respect other people's boundaries. We know this is so important. We know how much courage it takes to be able to set a boundary with somebody that we care about, that we value. We know how hard it is to sometimes set a boundary with somebody that we don't really quite care about. And so where does that come from? It comes from a childhood where we were told that our boundaries weren't valid, that our boundaries weren't okay, that it was our responsibility to take care of and attend to other people's feelings and needs. The question then is often asked to me, well, when does it go too far? And the answer is you get to decide. You get to figure that out. Me or no other therapist or coach or teacher gets to tell you what the right boundary is. The third quote I wanted to share with you, just to kind of prime the pump for tonight's broadcast, is also from James Hollis, where he said, the ultimate test of a family is not whether it provides safety and predictability, but whether or to what degree each person can leave it freely and return freely as a larger person. If you are a parent of adult children who are away and one of them decides to tell you that they're not going to come home for the holidays this time of year, that's an opportunity. No matter how sad you might feel or disappointed you might feel, that's an opportunity to praise them for the courage that it took them, obviously, to set a boundary with you, knowing that it might hurt you, that it might disappoint you, that it might leave a hole in your heart, and wanting to see them. But what you also communicate to them when you respect their boundary is the idea that you'll take care of yourself, that you've taken on the responsibility to take care of yourself in this process. So those are a few quotes I just wanted to start off with that I thought were interesting. Why do I talk about boundaries so often? Why is this my 10th or so broadcast about boundaries? Why is it so hard for people to explain boundaries or to understand boundaries? Let's talk about that. First of all, they're subjective. There's no objective template for boundaries. You get to decide what's right for you. And when people accuse you of being too boundaried, that again is them trying to shame or control you, coerce you into meeting their need. It's going to be sloppy at first if you start to become more boundaried. That's a really important thing to understand. As a parent, as a partner, as a child of parents, as a friend, the list goes on. It starts off really obnoxious, extreme, abrupt. But that's how it starts off with any skill, any new idea. You go out to try to play an instrument. You're going to not be very good at it at first. You start a painting class. You're not going to be very good at it at first. The list goes on. After a while, after you become more comfortable with yourself, after you face the metaphorical dragons in your life, the shame, the should not, eventually you'll become more graceful in your setting of boundaries. The reason why this is so important is not just to give yourself the leeway, the flexibility to stumble through it, but to recognize that the people that are setting boundaries with you are going to be going through that same growth curve. It's going to be, and I'm borrowing this word from Harriet Lerner. I borrowed some of the ideas tonight from her book, The Dance of Anger, my favorite book on boundaries. This idea that she talks about, that the initial stage of a person establishing a pattern of boundaries is obnoxious. There's no right way. When I think about boundaries, or when people talk to me about boundaries, it's not like I'm sitting here thinking, this is the right way to do it. You should do it this way. This is what a good boundary is. My response is, okay, what do you need? Try it that way. See how it feels. See how it works for you. But boundaries and boundary work, it's the beginning and the end of the development of a healthy self. It's the first thing that we start to do when we engage in the work of self-discovery, of growth. And it's the thing that we do on a daily basis, even after we've made large strides in the areas of self-growth. It never goes away. Just this week, my wife and I had an exchange where I set a boundary and she responded to it. And we talked about it the next day. And it took all of the courage in the world for me to set it and for her to respond and respect it because she had a need that I couldn't meet in that given moment at that given time. I want to tell you that I struggle with it, so you don't get this idea that some therapist, that any therapist out there is doing it perfectly or effortlessly. If you think that, then you're going to compare yourself against that made up, that fictitious ideal, and you're going to beat yourself up over it. It is a work in process for all of us. They're personal. You know, when you go to Al-Anon, let's just say you follow my directive and you try Al-Anon on. When you go to Al-Anon, you're going to learn about boundaries. And you'll think, see, this is what people think. They'll think getting better boundaries is being tougher with the people that I love. It can be, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. Getting boundaries, as I explained, is not setting stricter boundaries. Getting boundaries is setting better boundaries, clearer boundaries, courageous boundaries, boundaries which focus on you taking care of yourself and not trying to manipulate or change anybody else. So boundaries can look, they can really span the entire spectrum of strict versus permissive, of loose versus tight. And I think in our field, the field that I grew up in, the field of adolescent and young adult treatment, I think we have communicated poorly, largely, to the masses to suggest that getting more boundary means being stricter with your child. And it doesn't mean that. It means doing it from a place of love, compassion, courage, awareness, or self-reflection. And if you do it from those places, you can't get it wrong. And the opposite is doing it from a place of fear, from a place of anger or rage or hurt. To do it to try to control other people. Doing it from a place of shame or guilt, or to try to induce those feelings. You get more clear and you become less interested in selling the world on your boundary. Convincing not just the child or the partner, but anybody that you're setting a correct boundary for yourself. We have a ton of shame around our boundaries. We have, most of us, I want to say all of us, but I'll leave it open to the possibility that there's somebody that I haven't met yet that doesn't fall into this idea. Most of us, for the most part, we feel so much shame when we don't take care of the people that have taken care of us. And it makes sense from a psychological evolutionary perspective, right? If we didn't make sure that the people that were taking care of us, keeping us alive, felt okay enough to be around us, they might abandon us and we could die. That's the wiring in our DNA, in our history, in the Homo sapien. But we know something, we know more now. We're more evolved. Not everything is fight or flight. And it's okay to not give an ant a hug or a kiss when she asks for it. To be in control of your own body. To tell somebody who's asking for help, I can't do it right now. I need to take care of myself. Shame is this thing that keeps us stuck. And to be able to set better boundaries, we have to grapple with shame and guilt. We have to make some progress in our personal wrestling with shame and guilt. It's hard when the other person is present. Sometimes I coach people to take a pause, to take a break, to take a time out, to not give an answer right away, to wait an hour or a day, just to get clear and grounded in what you need, what your body, what your psyche is telling you. Sometimes it gets confusing because we think, again, we're going to learn this boundary about, let's use a simple example like drinking. I could use drinking for your child or for your partner. And let's say you get to this conclusion where you think, I don't want alcohol in my life, either in the person of my child or in the person of my partner. Right? I'm just using this hypothetical. And then the equation just changes a marginal amount. Right? The child turns 21. or the partner explains that they don't really have a problem and they never really get intoxicated. Whatever the equation is that changes. And then we lose our center, we lose our grounding. I've said this before. One of the things that I loved about wilderness therapy in the early days was that all of our communication between parent and child was through snail mail. Some people had fax machines, but oftentimes people didn't have home fax machines, and they definitely didn't have email and scanners. And they would go to the local mailboxes store, and they would fax there, receive a fax there, but mostly it was snail mail. And I loved it because the request that children were making of parents, or the complaining, was missing the parent. The parent had to write a letter before they got the letter sent to them, before they received it. And so the child and the parent would say often, like, I don't feel like we're communicating because we're missing each other. We're like a week late on our response to simple questions or requests. And part of what I used to love about that process is it required you to get more grounded and centered in yourself. You weren't doing this knee-jerk back and forth, this reflexive response to the other person, like a pinball machine with all the lights going off. You had time. You could wait and you could find your truth. I've had students of our program say, when I get home, I'll talk to my parents about this difficult topic. Or when I'm with them, I'll get better. And my thought to them, my response to them was invariably, it doesn't get easier to sit in front of somebody and articulate your feelings, set your boundaries. I think what people are aware of is, if I can't sit in front of you and read you, I don't know how to please you. If I can't read, if I'm not sitting in front of you when I'm discussing an important issue with some emotional content, or grappling with a boundary with you, if I can't see and read your face and cues, how do I even know what to say? But of course, the answer to that question is, you find the answer inside of yourself. Yes, we take into consideration the people that we care about and the people that we love and the requests that they make of us. That's part of being in a relationship. But that's very different than being tied to making them happy, feeling responsible for their sadness, trying to control their emotional reaction. We struggle with boundaries because we want to control outcomes. I can't tell you sometimes how many dozens, if not hundreds of hours sometimes it takes in therapy for somebody to realize, oh, my boundary isn't about changing the other person. And I can set a healthy boundary, an appropriate boundary, an authentic, courageous boundary from a place of love and courage. And the other person still might not respond the way that I want them to. They still might hate me. They still might think that I'm crazy. Because we're so accustomed. I know I am. I know I have been. We're so accustomed to try to control other people and how they feel and how they think about us, how they respond. Again, I think the fundamental issue that I often try to help parents unravel, or partners unravel, is that boundaries aren't, ideally, they don't come from a place of wanting to change the other person, but they come from a place of self-care, of taking care of myself. And if you can practice a kind of benign indifference to the other person's needs and requests, that's a phrase that somebody recently used in therapy with me. You can begin to discover your truth, begin to live according to your own value system, according to what you believe. And in the long run, even though that it's going to be rough for everybody to adjust to this new way of being, in the long run, it is a healthier dynamic. And you, as the boundary setter, are more capable of love. They're subtle. Boundaries are subtle. They're not necessarily visible. I've shared many examples where somebody comes to me with a question about a decision that they're trying to make, and my response is, it's not about the decision that you make specifically, it's about where it comes from. If it comes from a place of fear and trying to control the other person, I would suggest that you consider something else. And if it comes from a place of love and courage and strength and groundedness and authenticity, sounds fine to me. You get to do it. It's not necessarily external. Two people can say essentially the same words, but the energy is different. You can say to your child, I'm not going to let you use drugs while you're in my house under the age of 18. I'm not comfortable with it. It's a very different energy than, if I can stop you from using drugs, I can prevent the inevitable addiction that will occur and you'll be okay. The boundary is the same, but very different energy, very different emotional basis or grounding, and very different experience for the other person. Boundaries essentially are traced back to our intention. You might recall the story I told where a parent in a large group asked, I feel like I want to tell my child how much this program costs. And while I was pausing, trying to think about how I was going to respond to that, somebody else in the audience said, why? Just why? And the person who had asked the original question paused for a moment thoughtfully and said, never mind, I have my answer. I wanted to guilt them. I wanted to make them feel obligated. I wanted them to owe me. And with that realization, she said, I'm not going to, the desire to share with them how much this cost is gone now. Our insight about a boundary, about what we need, can disappear in the face of stress, resistance, or resistance to our boundaries. That's very important, especially around the holidays. Every single human being, no matter how many years that they've been in therapy, can be introduced to a circumstance or situation, a person, where the insight is gone. It just disappears. It is inevitable that something can push a button. So you're kind to yourself. You're human. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to say one thing one moment and change your mind the next. You're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to try it on for size. Boundaries are related to so much of what we do and what we're treating. Like I said, it relates to communication skills training. It relates to enabling and rescuing. It relates to behavioral management. And it relates to our own peace of mind. Like I said, boundaries can change from moment to moment. There's no generic solution. I don't work with clients to try to help them figure out an answer and stick to it. I work with them. I was just reading a quote by Einstein the other day about how he talked about this idea that it's physics, right? Like, you surround yourself with people that are vibrating at the same level that you are. And the universe will have no choice but to respond to that vibration with likeness, right? It's kind of like manifesting. But he said, this is not magic, this is science. My job in talking to you on these broadcasts, this podcast, whatever it is, however you're consuming this, my job is to help you think in such a way so that when something comes to you next hour, you have a reference point, you have some tools, you can figure it out, you can think your way through it. But if I just tell you the right boundary with drugs is this, the right boundary with your partner drinking is this, the right boundary with your parents around the holidays is this, do you see how I've offered you something very, very small and narrow? It takes time to figure out who we are and what it means to relate to somebody in a loving way. I had a parent tell me lately that he was at a work party, doesn't work in this field, and he felt like such an alien. People sharing opinions about his particular brand of parenting and what he's been learning. And he said to me, is this normal? I feel like nobody else is doing this. And I said, it's like that at first. Jamie Gill said to me many years ago, once you've been in analysis, that's a very dedicated version of therapy. Once you've been in a very dedicated therapy practice for a long time as a client, you kind of don't like hanging around other people who haven't been in therapy a lot. It doesn't make sense. What you think is healthy self-care, they think of as selfishness. What you think of as love, they think is not caring. What you think as a boundary, they think of as a dereliction of responsibility or obligation to the relationship. That's how different this work looks to somebody who hasn't done the work. Like I said, people tend to focus on changing others rather than taking care of themselves. For example, what will this teach my kid? How do I get this message across to them? You might remember the story I've told many times about the colleague that asked me how I was with boundaries. And while I was thinking about my response, she said to me, if a client called you on a Sunday morning, would you be sure not to pick up the phone? So to teach the client about your boundary. And I said, no, first of all, I don't not answer the phone to teach anyone a lesson. Ideally, I answer the phone when I feel comfortable answering the phone, and I don't answer it when I don't. When I'm around people, clients, and I do something that they perceive is a loose boundary, I can feel it. They're like, oh my gosh, he just answered the phone on a Sunday, using this as an example. I thought he was good with boundaries. And they don't understand that I get to decide what I'm comfortable with. I'm not trying to be tough. I'm not trying to teach people about myself. I'm trying to be myself. They'll figure it out after a while. They'll adjust. It's easier to try to get other people to change. This is why boundaries are so hard. It is so much easier to try to get other people to change rather than deal with the anxiety and the guilt that comes from setting a boundary. Just that sentence. I could just read that sentence, and that would almost be enough for tonight's broadcast. It's easier to try to guilt, convince, debate, intimidate, shame, scare, choose the emotional, coercive language. It's easier to try to get somebody to do what I want them to do than it is. If I set a boundary with my child and they withdraw, all of a sudden I have these tapes in my head saying, what if my child doesn't love me? What if we're not together as a family? The holidays are coming up. I want my child to care about me. I want us to be that big, happy family I always dreamed of. That's what comes up for us when we set a boundary with our partner. When I set a boundary with my wife this week, it was a necessity for me in terms of what I had to do. But part of what I was afraid of is that reaction, that punishment. And I had to walk away and grapple with my anxiety, maybe even my guilt that I wasn't there for her. Because I learned, of course, as a young man, that it was a man's job or woman's job for a woman. Doesn't matter if it's male or female, male or male, female, female. It's a person's job to make their partner happy. I was taught that insane idea about romantic relationships. And I carry that around in my body. And now I have to use my therapy. I'm talking about the therapy that I've done as a client. I have to use my therapy to overwrite what my body is telling me I should do. Does that make sense? My body is going to feel horrible when I say no to this person, when I say I can't, when I say this is my limit. My body is going to feel horrible, but my brain, because of the therapy, reminds me it's okay. You're allowed to take care of yourself. Taking care of yourself ensures your ability to love and to care for the people that you love and care for, starting with yourself. There's no right boundary. There's no generic solution. It's a practice, a way of being. Like I said, being self-reflective, introspective, self-critical, critical of our childhood. I don't mean it's negative when I use the word critical. I just means looking at it, unpacking it, unraveling it, understanding it. And of course, boundaries are difficult because of our conditioning from childhood, which leads to self-doubt when someone else is upset or isn't convinced that the boundary is okay. In other words, we were taught to be right, and we were taught that we had to justify our boundary and our position. The more we can find ways to let our children and to honor their boundaries, the less likely they're going to end up in abusive and toxic relationships later on. James Hollis said in the Eden Project, one of my favorite and deepest and most dense books about couples and intimacy, he said, it takes great courage to ask this fundamental question. What am I asking of this other that I ought to be doing for myself? If, for example, I am asking the other to be mindful of my self-esteem, I have a project waiting to be unaddressed. I have a project waiting unaddressed. If I am expecting the other to be a good parent and to take care of me, then I have not grown up. If I am expecting the other to spare me the rigor and terror of living my own journey, then I have abdicated from the chief task and most worthy reason for my incarnation on this earth. He's a great writer. What he's saying is, it is your job to take care of you. It's not your child's job. It's not even at this point as an adult, which I assume I'm speaking to adults. It's not your parents' job to take care of you anymore. It's not your spouse's job to take care of you. A mantra that my wife and I have adopted the last 15 years of our marriage is, you're not responsible for making me happy. That's my job. And I'm not responsible for making you happy. That's your job. And with that, our marriage has improved exponentially. The old way was filled with resentments and fears and anxiety and shame and guilt and coercion. So what do boundaries sound like? What do they look like? I'm going to get more practical tonight. They look like what you're comfortable with, what comes out of your truth. And that's just a therapeutic way of saying what's true for you. The feelings, the thoughts, the wants, the hopes, the tolerances, the needs. They're essentially synonymous with self-care. I wrote this a while back, and I'm going to share this again here tonight. My 5 keys for healthy boundaries. Learning to balance compassion for our children or our partner's pain while maintaining accountability is a critical feature in parenting and partnership and attachment. Key number 1, and there are 5. Boundaries are not for changing others, but derive from a parent's sense or a partner's sense of self. As in, quote, this is what I feel good about. This is what I need in this situation, unquote. It's not about what's right. It's not about convincing them that you're doing it for their best interest. It's not about convincing them that the principle that you're enforcing with your boundary is something they need to learn. It's not about the other person. It's about what you need. Key number 2, don't make it about being right, but rather about being a self, as in, quote, I might be crazy, old-fashioned, or an idiot, but this is my boundary, unquote. This key is the most powerful position that we can take. It sets an example for our children, in resisting peer pressure. It shows our partner that we don't have to argue for what we need. They don't have to agree with us. We get to be ourselves, and they get to adjust. Key number 3, similar to key 2, don't explain your decisions or boundaries to your children or to your partner in the effort. That's the key. In the effort to get them to agree or be okay with the boundaries. Don't say, quote, for example, quote, I'm doing this for your own good, or, quote, I'm doing this because I love you, unquote. You're trying to sell them on it. Children have told me in therapy that the greatest difference between therapeutic programs and home is that the child in therapeutic programs is allowed to be mad and angry and disagree with the staff. Whereas at home, it's not so simple. It's not so emotionally free in that way. And that makes sense, of course, right? Because we parents, we hang our self-esteem sometimes on our children. Compare that to me at work. I can let your child be upset and angry, and it doesn't hook my self-esteem, whereas it might with my own child. It doesn't threaten me, doesn't trigger me, doesn't push the proverbial button. Key number 4, listen to them. Listen to the other person as much as you're able, and no more. Listen to them as much as you're able. And respond with genuine empathy and allow them to be angry, hurt, or upset with you and your decisions, as in, I get it, you're angry, upset, and it makes sense. I'm so sorry this is hard, and I'm glad you're telling me how you feel. Or just simply listen and be silent. It's not that you say those things out loud. That might feel contrived and patronizing. But that's what goes on inside of your head. Often it's just be silent. Let them be upset. Let them disagree. Let them not like it. Give them the psychological empowerment to be themselves. And you take on the responsibility of your own self-worth, your own self-esteem. And finally, key number 5, don't use your emotions to try to get your children to change. When you do this, you're telling your child that that your feelings are their responsibility. This will lead them to believe that what others think and feel about them is theirs to manage. Don't say, for example, quote, I am angry, scared, or hurt, unquote, as a substitute for boundary setting. It's okay to tell your children how you feel. And I've debated this over the years, but technically speaking, it's perfectly appropriate and okay to tell your child or your partner how you feel, but not as a substitute for setting a boundary. Not as an implication that now, because you've told them how you feel, that they are supposed to respond with your request so that you don't feel uncomfortable or badly in some way. So yes, it's okay to share your feelings. But the question that's critical that you ask yourself is, why am I telling them this? Am I trying to get them responsible for my feelings? Is it my belief that my sadness, my hurt, my anger is theirs to manage? That they need to behave differently so I don't feel scared or sad or hurt or angry? And that takes a kind of a ruthless honesty. Finally, I wrote, we can say we are sorry when we fail. Every parent has limits. You will fail at this, and every child will discover the end of your limits. Every partner will experience the end of your limits. We can say we're sorry when we fall short of the ideal. And with this, the child, in the case of parenting, learns perhaps the most important lesson of all, what it means to be a human. That's the goal. The goal is to teach them how to be a person. What are some signs of poor boundaries? Yelling, nagging, repetitive fights, comments, even, or even repeating I feel statements. See, you can weaponize the communication tools. Trying to guilt or shame others, blaming others for how you feel. Explaining yourself can be an indication of a poor boundary. Debating, arguing, convincing. Owning someone else's success and failures, specifically with our children. Is it being about us? That's a boundary where you haven't recognized where you stop and where they start. I aspire as a parent to let my children's failures be theirs psychologically. I'm not talking about boundaries right now. I'm talking about psychologically, the way I feel about them, to let their boundaries and their struggles be theirs and their successes be theirs. I want my struggles to be mine and my successes to be mine, but I don't want theirs to be mine. It's not about how it reflects on me. Resentments. Anger is often, not always, but anger is often a sign that you're expecting somebody to take care of you and they're failing at it. That you're expecting somebody to do your boundary work for you. If I can get my child to agree to not using marijuana by lecturing, by pleading, by nagging, by threatening, by trying to scare them, if I can get them to subscribe to the idea of not using marijuana, then I don't have to do the work with anxiety and guilt and fear of setting boundaries. You see? I don't have to confront my shame. I don't have to grow. I don't have to evolve or expand because I'm changing them. I've convinced them to never try drugs. So then I don't have to draw a line in the sand and follow through on a boundary or a consequence. Like I said, hoping someone will take care of us instead of taking on that responsibility ourselves. Expecting or resenting others to do it like we would do it, right? That's one of my favorite go-tos as a codependent person. I wouldn't treat somebody this way. If it were me, this is what I would do. In that situation, I would X, Y, or Z. That kind of thinking. It can be an okay exercise to kind of get grounded on, but if that's the way I'm operating in relationships, I'm not practicing or improving or sharpening my boundaries. And then, of course, talking to somebody else, complaining to somebody else is a good sign. I love what Harriet Lerner says in her book. This is a quote from a case study that she shares of a woman with an aging father who's asking for more and more of his daughter, of his adult daughter with her own children, and her own family. She came to the conclusion in psychotherapy, she said, no matter how long I'm in therapy, I'm still going to feel guilty if I say no to my father. But if I keep saying yes, I'm going to feel angry. So if I'm going to change, I guess I'll just have to learn to live with some guilt for a while. That sentence changed my life in 2011. That was the beginning of this whole journey for me. That moment when I read that in her book. I realized what I had been doing my entire life. I had been avoiding dealing with my guilt and my shame and placing the responsibility for change on the other person. And because I'm charismatic, I'm a good speaker, I have a decent command of language and in communication skills training, I have a few letters after my name. I spent my life trying to manipulate everybody. I prided myself on it. I didn't think of it as manipulation all the time. I thought of it as effective leadership as a father or an employer or a friend. But the fact of the matter is, I hadn't yet faced my own shadow, faced the thing I was most afraid of, dealt and grappled with my own sense of self up to that point. And this paragraph that I just read to you, I'm going to read it one more time. This was my invitation. The woman shares, no matter how long I'm in therapy, I'm still going to feel guilty if I say no to my father. But if I keep saying yes, I'm going to feel angry. So if I'm going to change, I guess I'll just have to learn to live with some guilt for a while. A resentment or anger can be a signal. It's something to listen to, something again to deconstruct. I've told the story about my son, my adult son, borrowing a painting. In fact, it's a painting that sits on my wall just to my right. He gave to me as a gift many years ago, and he borrowed it for an art show that he was in. And when he didn't return it, and I had a need for it because we were showing our house at the time, I ended up feeling really resentful and complaining to my wife, talking about how I was going to essentially get him back with harder and stricter boundaries. And as I heard myself complaining to my wife, I realized this is my work. This is my work. I called him. I told him when I needed it back, even though it was a 45-minute drive, and he said he didn't have the right car because it's a large painting. I said, you either bring it back by Wednesday night. The showing of the house is on Saturday. We want to get it staged by Friday. You either bring it back on Wednesday night or I'm going to pick it up. Knowing that the next time he asks for something like that, I might have a different response. Not to punish him, but to know that I have to take care of myself. I was resentful of him. I was even saying to my wife, we paid for his college. Look at all the support we've done. Look at how good we are. And look at how bad he is, was essentially my energy. But it was my work. I needed to deal with it. Resentment can also help us preserve our integrity, our sense of self. It can motivate us to say no. It can help us with a boundary. Anger is an effective tool, Harriet Lerner writes, when it causes us to become more clear about ourselves, not the other person. If you find yourself repeatedly angry at somebody or a certain dynamic, there's work that's undone for you to do. Doesn't matter if you're talking about your friend or your partner or your child. There's work for you to do. Anger can be the impetus, the starting point for a healthy and assertive boundary. It can give us permission, empower us to take care of our needs. I love that quote I saw somewhere, that playful quote that said, angry is sadness and scared's bodyguard. Right? Anger gives us the courage, the capacity to set boundaries, defending us from predators or people that would abuse us or violate our rights. It tells us that our needs aren't getting met. And then we ask ourselves, whose job is it really to take care of our needs? It tells us that we are being compromised and that we might be extending ourselves too far. I really think of boundaries as synonymous with self-care. First of all, you have to know what your self is. You have to have some sense of what you want, don't like, can tolerate, can't tolerate, and so forth. And there's no should. There's no right or wrong. It's just what you're comfortable with. And then boundaries become the operationalization of that self-care. They become how it looks in practice. Like I mentioned, resentment and anger can be a sign of poor self-care and boundaries. It can arise from the place of expecting others to treat us a certain way without requiring it, or making what I call the reciprocity mistake, which is I wouldn't treat you that way, and therefore magically you're just going to feel and think like I do and not treat me poorly or badly in this way. We can We can use it to make attacking messages, or we can use it to make I messages and recognize what we're responsible for. I just wanted to share this with you. I shared this last couple weeks ago on my social media. Here's what's I called it self-care, but self-care boundaries, like I said, they're fairly synonymous. Here's what self-care and boundaries sound like. No. Yes. I can't. I don't want to. I'd rather not. I'm not okay with that. I'm tired. I can't listen to you right now. I need a break. I need to leave. I can't listen to that right now. I don't like watching news clips of things like that. That's from our family, by the way. Our children have had to say this to us. I'm not willing to discuss this any further. I don't like that. I'm uncomfortable. I screwed up. And I put that on there because sometimes the boundary is taking accountability for our part. I'm not coming. Sorry, I have to cancel. I quit. Here's what I'm willing to do. I may be crazy or weird, but this is what I'm okay with doing. I need to take a break from this. I don't want to hear the other side of the story right now. Also, that came from our children. I don't want to hear what the other person might have been thinking when they hurt me. I don't want to hear their side of it right now. I want to be in my anger, in my sadness, in my hurt. I want to be allowed to feel what I'm feeling. I don't want to have to explain myself. I don't want to have to defend my boundary. I don't want to have to justify the stance that I'm taking. That's what it can sound like. Do you hear a theme in there? The theme is it's not about being good or right. It's about being a person, a human with limited capacities. But again, we just don't have that experience. We just haven't been indoctrinated into that culture. Ultimately, it comes down to that idea that I've described, that my therapist also shared with me, that you don't get to win, you get to choose how to lose. I repeat that mantra in my head every single day of my life. You don't get to win. You get to choose how to lose. You don't get to be right anymore. In parenting or in partnership, you don't get to be right anymore. But you do get to be a self, which is so much better. The work is to make friends with your horrible, rotten self. I call it horrible, rotten self because it's a playful way of saying that's what it's going to feel like at first. Your body, this is important, your body will resist making healthy improvements in your life. It just will. And it makes sense. It's how you've been trained. It's how you've been taught. It's how you've been conditioned. It's how you've been behaviorally reinforced. It's how you've been raised. When that gentleman shared with me that he was at a work party and everybody else seemed so different from him because of the work that he's been doing with his very addicted son over the past few years, it was because he had made peace with the fact that the whole world can think I'm horrible, and I'm okay with that. I had a client ask me this week, and I said to them, I said, I'm not interested. It's subtle and it happens over time, but I'm just not interested in convincing people around me that I'm right anymore. I'm not interested in explaining myself. I don't have the energy and the time for that, especially when when they're not very easy and susceptible to my explanation. Stop trying to be good. You're already good. You're already okay. It's just you haven't been around people who can recognize it. You most likely, like me, weren't raised by them, and I'm not picking on them. They weren't raised by people who understood this stuff either, and so on and so on and so on. This is new. This is uh this is different than what the dominant culture teaches us. And like I said, it's not just our culture, it's every culture. I was working with a Middle Eastern family many years ago, and I kept finding myself explaining to them, I know it might be different in your culture. And then I just stopped myself after the 10th time of saying it. I said, what am I saying? My next door neighbor doesn't get this stuff. My parents don't get this stuff. My siblings don't get it. My spouse and My children, to some degree, get it. But that's just because we're all on this same journey, the same path. But this is foreign to most everybody. This is the road less traveled. This is the departure in the hero's journey from the comfortable world, the world that we're living in. This is answering the call to the invitation to go out there and find what you're searching for, which is peace and serenity and meaning and an underlining baseline of joy and happiness. Often we are trying to get from others what our parents were responsible to have given to us: praise, worth, value of self. See, if we were raised by parents who honored the principles that I'm talking about, we would have less work to do. Very little if they did it really, really well. Because then when somebody got upset with us, we wouldn't be triggered by it. We would just be curious about their background. We would see them. Don't justify or make the boundary about the other person's behavior. I'm doing this for your own good. This is the right thing to do. Anybody would think this way. Everybody thinks this way. Those kinds of ideas and phrases, just own it. But you don't get to be right. You don't get to be good. You don't get to win. But you do get to be a self, which is so much better. All right. What are the take-home messages? You're going to have to grapple with guilt and anxiety. It's inevitable. If you don't grapple with guilt and anxiety, your children and your partner will pay the price. You'll be asking them to do the work that is your work. I'll tell you, I posted this last night on my story on social media. It's not a brand new thing that I posted. I posted something like it before. This is not from some new American therapist who thinks that they've just discovered the light for the first time. This is from Carl Jung, somebody that we consider one of the founders of psychotherapy, essentially. Carl Jung said the greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived life of the parents. If you don't do this work, you will essentially pass on your undone work, your trauma, if you will, to your children. If you don't do this work and sort out your own sense of self, grapple with your own guilt and shame and anxiety and fear, if you don't do that work, you'll be asking your partner to carry the burden, to carry the load. The process is progress, not perfection. If you're listening to people talk about boundaries as if they've mastered it, I would probably listen to a new teacher. Healthy, wise teachers know that this is a human, messy process, that you never arrive. Healthy teachers will encourage compassion for yourself, your imperfections, your humanness. We have to understand our own programming from our family of origin. We have to learn to overwrite the original programming, which is essentially that we were taught to feel responsible for what others were feeling or thinking. And we teach other people to how to treat us, not by complaining or teaching them or expressing anger, but by our actions. When parents or partners say they can't treat me that way, my response is often, yeah, they can. Anybody can treat you any way they want until you don't let them. And then I hear parents asking me, yeah, but what about raising a child? I can't just divorce my son or my daughter. And my response is, there are thousands of ways to operate, to behave, to relate that fall short of that. It might arise to a pretty significant level because you're making a balloon payment on the lack of boundary setting over the course of many years. But children can learn this. They can adjust. They can figure it out. Or they won't, and they'll just suffer. And they'll have to figure out how to ease their suffering. There's loneliness on this journey. But in the end, I've said this recently, I have more solitude in my life than I've ever had. And I have less loneliness in my life than I've ever had. Right? I don't spend as much time trying to fit into places where I don't belong. I don't spend time trying to engage in conversations where I don't belong. To be at dinner parties where I'm not interested in the conversation that's happening. Working on your boundaries will lead to a sense of empowerment, hope, and liberation. The individual that works on his or her boundaries will feel less depression, less resentment, and less fear and anxiety. You'll have more hope. You'll have more serenity. And it kind of is a chicken and the egg equation, right? The more serenity you have, the more you can set boundaries, which leads to more serenity and so forth and so on. You'll have to resist the urge to measure yourself by how other people respond, especially your children, especially your children. And do this for you. If you won't do it for you, do it for your marriage, for your partnership, or for your child. In our family, we have an idea that we follow from Ram Dass, the guru, that the only thing that I can do for you is to work on myself. The only thing that you can do for me is to work on yourself. And I do my work first for me, but second, I do my work for the people that I love in my circle and for my clients and the people that I serve professionally. And I don't have time or energy. I only have so many breaths left on this earth. And I just don't have the time to spend it trying to convince people that my way of being is the right way to be, my way to be. When we try new things, we're going to get anxious. We're going to get it wrong. We're going to be awkward. That's okay. You're going to have to tolerate guilt. There's no way out of the prison that you've found yourself in except for to go through guilt and shame. There's no easy way out. There's no pill. There's no silver bullet that I can give you. I can talk to you. I can teach you. We can be with each other on these broadcasts, on the podcast. And after a while, I mean, this helps me. I do this work to try to help you, of course, to teach, but I do this work also because it helps me. Because it keeps my soul on fire. Go to meetings where people are talking about this stuff. Go to therapy if you're able to. Go to a retreat if you're able to. Go to a Finding You intensive if you're able to. Go to Onsite. Go to the Meadows. Go to the Bridge to Recovery. Go to the House of Ocala. Go to Go to Breakthrough Recovery at the Caron Foundation. Go somewhere where the work is to look at your past and understand how it's shaping your present. All right, folks, that's an hour. I hope this was helpful point of contact. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. Like I always say, if you want to do this work, if you want to help your child, if you want to help your marriage, the best thing you could do is to work on yourself. Our version of that is the Finding You Intensive. The next offering is January 17th through 21st in person, or January 26th through 28th online. You can go to our website or email intensives@evoketherapy.com. You can find out about our Finding You online, our Finding You in person. We also have a Returning to You, which is the sequel to Finding You. And then we have the Finding Connection workshop that I mentioned earlier. We have custom offerings for families and couples. Just email us at intensives@evoketherapy.com, or go to our website. We have support groups for current and alumni families. The December 7th at 7 p.m. offering, that is Thursday, is for any current or alumni families of our wilderness program. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting. December 26th is that offering for people that are a little bit farther along, December 26th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. We have an intensive support group once a month, December 12th at 6 p.m. Family treks are for families in the wilderness. If you want to do a mid-program trek, multi-day therapeutic experience, at the end of the program, or even if your child isn't in wilderness or has never been in wilderness, if you want to do an outdoor experiential Family therapy experience. Our family trek option is that offering. Email admissions@evoketherapy.com for more information. We have coaches that can help you with all the stuff I'm talking about for parents, couples, families, or individuals. Contact coaching@evoketherapy.com, especially at this time of year when you need somebody to talk to help navigate what can be very tricky and tenuous waters during the holiday season. We encourage all of our current clients to just experiment with 6 support groups, any combination of the following: Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, AdultChildren.org. Also, RefugeRecovery.org is another offering, a Buddhist-inspired recovery program, less of an emphasis on a higher power. And the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, has free classes and resources in your local community. All of these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. Just go to your podcast app, wherever you consume podcasts, and search Finding You, an Evoke Therapy podcast, and subscribe there. And then you'll be notified when there are new episodes that drop. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen there, or Evoke's YouTube channel has rebroadcasts of the video versions of these broadcasts. You can watch them with the slides there. You can always email and ask us for slides of any of our episodes by emailing us at webinar@evoketherapy.com. Just for your information. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on X, Threads, and Instagram using the handles @EvokeTherapy and @DrBradReedy, respectively. And you can find Evoke Therapy Intensives on Instagram using the handle @EvokeTherapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, you can find our blog, which has wonderful, personal, heartfelt content by our therapist. A wonderful one just came out this week from Corey Wright. She wrote about some difficult things to say about wilderness therapy in a time when wilderness therapy has been under some concern and criticism. So check it out if you're interested on our blog. If you want to give back, it's near the end of the year. It's the end of your opportunities to make a tax deductible donation to a charity. The 3 charitable partners that we work with to help people that can't afford therapy are ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, or EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. You can earmark your donation, your tax-deductible donation, for a specific program or for a specific population that might be near and dear to your heart. All right. My next broadcast will be December 12th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. I'll be doing a Q&A for family and friends and siblings. So any questions from tonight, any questions in between, you can email us, like I said, at webinar@evoketherapy.com. We'll put those at the top of the queue, and I look forward to that next week. All right, folks, I hope you have a great week. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. And for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thanks for showing up and being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.